What led you to think, yeah, I could be an artist? Dan?
There's probably no one thing as to what led me to become an artist. I think I might be a byproduct of the environment that I was brought up in. So I had a family that my parents were interested in visual art, and they also had a chain of bookstores, so I was subject to quite a bit of visual information, and I don't think I was aware of that at the time, but I was collecting that, poring over art books. Maybe the next thing is just also having the good fortune to be able to participate in some visual arts in the formative years. So, or even actually as an adolescent, just to be able to make a project. I think to make a project, to invent an idea and then to see the idea through became something that's interesting. And then to exist in the world as a creative problem solver might be another reason.
Jen?
A lot of what Daniel says I can relate to. I don't think there was necessarily a single moment when I decided or knew I wanted to be an artist. I think it was more a case of working to be an artist, working to become an artist. And I would say the moment that really I was committed to being an artist maybe wasn't even going to art school. It was only when I was able to give up any other type of full-time job. Until then, it could have gone either way, even though, maybe I was already an artist. But it was maybe, I'd say 10 years ago when being an artist is the only activity that I was pursuing and able to do it full-time and not worry about other jobs, etc.
I would like to say that also we tried to not be artists. And
Exactly.
And not being an artist is such a terrible option, and it's so out of the question that I think it scared us into being artists. So there must be a thing, and it's not foolishness, and it's not being having some false illusion or idea. It's definitely felt like we have to do this, and as much as it's a profession, it's certainly not an affliction, but it is some kind of an obsession or a reason to continue or persist.
Somewhere between an affliction and an obsession.
It's not an affliction. It's an insult to say it's an affliction, but it probably is an obsession. It's a very, very fortunate position to be in. So it should never be confused with the mythology around madness or suffering.
I think some people see a career or a job as a means to an end. And myself, I always wanted to do something that I enjoyed doing. I didn't want a job that was just a job. I wanted to love what I do each day.
So the we here, part of the extension of the question, I guess, is talking about and you successfully produced a career and a very dynamic professional profile as a working group. Now, can I ask when the group formed or how you understood that working together was something that could work?
It was never something that was a decision or discussed. We worked on a project when we were still in art school. Our first project together was called the Multimedia Dome. And when we worked on the Multimedia Dome, I think we saw aspects of each other's practice that we could relate to, that we appreciated. We saw commonalities. We produced the Multimedia Dome, and then we just continued to produce work together. So it was never a case of making a decision to collaborate. It was just something that evolved.
It's interesting because one of the arguments for art school, perhaps, is to find those kinds of collaborations, whether literally a group or whether an extended sense of interest in one another's practice.
I would agree that at art school, I had some very good advice entering into art school. A professor from the previous school that I was at, she said that it'll be about the colleagues you find and the camaraderie and the cross-pollination of ideas and the community that you find. So it was hard at first, but then the right people at the Ontario College of Art, they found each other, and Jen and I found each other. We were part of, it was an extended group of people who were quite active, who were putting on exhibitions and projects and parties and concerts and the whole thing. It was, we didn't realize at the time, but maybe we were the most committed to the idea of practicing and practicing together. But in those early years, there was so much sharing of time on each other's projects and working in a community. Definitely that was the best aspect of art school.
I'm thinking of something that Dave Hickey said, which was that there are questions of argument, there's the question of the social and the cultural, and everybody can participate in those discussions. What makes an artwork different? And his suggestion, roughly speaking, was that what makes an artwork different is the seduction of being brought into a kind of totality, into a sense that one has been brought into the argument, you've been invited into the argument, and you can roam around that argument without somebody saying, well, that's not right, you're incorrect. In effect, you have the space inside that argument because of the invitation offered by the artwork to follow something that might be impossible to have imagined otherwise. Now that's a very long sort of introduction to that process.
And that's what an artist does, or that's if things go well. But often all of those factors don't go very well. So I think that would be the goal would be to then construct those ideas within a cohesive framework that people feel that they can be invited into, and that the presentation is worthwhile enough for it to be digested and considered, and then possibly be considered within a framework, or be considered as singular. So singular that it is without precedent. So without precedent, some people say that's good. Now, are those things really happening? To some extent, yes, but what might be happening is that it's all a trope, and that gets away from the question of what artists are doing. Artists are trying to make art and trying to produce art, and sometimes they are. For the most part, they are. They're actually probably always producing it if they say they're producing it.
I think when an artist is producing work, definitely there's a very intense relationship with the work while it's being produced. And like any relationship, there are different stages. But I think the goal is to produce a work that then becomes autonomous. And then you're offering the viewer that complete experience. The work itself is offering the viewer that complete experience. And I think because it's such a complete experience, and because it's the viewer and the artwork, I think it's offering a very personal experience. You're communicating to someone through the art object in a way that's very personal and private when it's immediate. And then it involves all sorts of other factors, and there's a context, but on a basic level, it's the immediacy of the viewer with the work.
Yeah, it's a tough question.
Mary White. Mary White has a little quote here, and I'm not actually summarizing it, but it's to the effect that your work exposes the transparency and opacity of the modernist paradigm. And I'm kind of curious as to whether you would agree with Murray, if this is what he's up to, in defining the core project that you've taken on for yourselves.
I think this quote from Murray White comes from our exhibition project for a New American Century, and I think that exhibition is just one of many different proposals that we've made, or propositions through our work over the last 15 or 20 years, because we've worked in the context of trying to find some commentary on the political avant-garde, or the neo-political avant-garde, on commodity culture, and on mass media, critique of mass media, on electronic art, on installation art, on critique of mass media and truth, or official version of history. That's starting in a post 9/11 context, pretty early on in the debate, to expressions of public art, architecture, landscape architecture, spectacle, and then maybe some return to authenticity and questioning of truth again. So Murray probably is not trying to pigeonhole us, because he, I think, has also mentioned in the same article that the work had too broad a focus previously, but in that case he was happy with this particular exhibition because it was cogent. But to answer your question, in that particular case, yes, the work is about transparency and opacity within the context of modernity. And we spent a long time constructing an exhibition that would come down to a comparison between what would be considered a terrible controversy or scandal in the Nixon era, and what would not be considered a terrible controversy or scandal today. And then we are also interested in the way art has presented itself and been used for political purposes of empire in the 20th century by various different empires or countries. So some of the myths of modernity, yes, we are interested in shedding light on or adding critique to, but also to history, and also not necessarily in such an overt way.
I feel you've taken me on a voyage around the world.
That was funny.
Jen would like to bring me back down to earth.
You could talk about a specific work.
I don't know.
Well, I think Daniel touched on a number of different areas in our practice. And I think those are threads that carry through throughout our practice. In the show, The Collaborationists.
Oh, sorry, that was Collaborationists that you said that about.
Yes,
Not Project for the American Century.
I think so.
You have to cut that out.
You're entitled to an honest error. Besides, it's your words. So.
I have to say that whole thing. Hey, so go for the top one.
But perhaps I can ask this. As I hear you both speak, then it would seem, if I want to corral this together, and I actually want you to, but if there's a core to the practice, and as you say, that practice now goes back 20 years or so, I'm curious as to whether history and politics remains the core of that practice that in all its manifestations.
For me, yes. I think for Jennifer, less.
Yeah.
It's like,
I think that's one area, but I think there are other areas. We started out looking at the art object as commodity and critiquing commodity culture. But at the same time, we were also very interested in electronics and media art. But we were more interested in looking at minimalism within the context of media and electronic art and serialism. So working in a non-traditional way in electronic art, it wasn't about the technology per se.
there's still, I think what Jen is saying is that there's definitely sub-genres or subjects in our practice. We definitely want to have an open practice that does not have to conform to expectations about what a practice is. We might have actually also somewhat knowingly created this self-sustaining kind of practice from the perspective that it doesn't necessarily need to have curatorial dialogue with it. And to answer what the question is does the work have as a core focus a basis in history and politics? Well, those aren't really formal aesthetic concerns, and the practice is so formal and aesthetic and has such a strong purpose in terms of material, so that your question, it could only make up half of what we do. And then, are we interested in the politics? Yes, but not in an overt manner and as a form of critique. Or are we interested in history as a form of critique? Well, maybe as a form of language, almost linguistically, as a form of reference. So, is it a core thing? Yes, today, sure, but we've already made it half of the thing by saying that it's formal and aesthetic, which I think would be more fair. And then some people would say possibly that it's highly design-oriented, or it's highly concerned with a level of finish, just so.
But now more and more concerned with public space as well, and with how people use space.
I'm interested in the space that I'm seeing as I talk to you. And you're flanked by two faux cacti, as we mentioned earlier, and the painting on the wall, which of course does have has a kind of reminiscent attachment to modernism, as we generally understand it. I'm struck by the formality of the arrangement, even the way you're sitting before me. And I I can only imagine that this is intentional. So I have
Just our
this
studio.
odd sense that if we're talking about, and I apologize for the word core because it's probably misleading, but if there is an attachment that you have as you're talking, the attachment seems to be to a kind of balancing, a kind of constant attempt to balance things in such a way as to construct a sense of harmony even. And harmony doesn't come cheap, it comes with a lot of effort. That's what an artist can do. So, here we are.
Spoken like a professional of the arts, yes. Do you want to talk about some of the balancing that we do?
I'm not sure what sense you mean balancing.
When I was at art school, I was taught that if you wanted to achieve harmony, it wasn't enough to have two things that were nicely situated on each side with something plunk in the middle, and that static quality would suffice, which it doesn't. Harmony is purchased as the result of disharmony, if you want, as a result of things that are not in balance, but somehow in the ability of the artist to produce harmony, that imbalance is resituated, and it's a very subtle thing. That was what I learned from art school, maybe. But I'm seeing it here, and I'm very, very much struck by what you were saying about the fact that, yes, one can talk history and politics, but at the end of the day, coming back to Dave Hickey perhaps, at the end of the day, it's not enough to talk about history and politics. It's really to talk about how you produce something that may have a sense of resonance with history and politics, but which has its own, you might say, dignity as a formal enterprise that leads one back to history and politics, perhaps.
Well, it's complicated. I mean,
It's very complicated.
So the artist must make something that is unbelievable. So it is so convincing that it then verges into the unbelievable, which then questions the reality of the person who's taking in the work. So there's more going on than you're saying. You're not being fair to us. It's a hilarious balance, or it's a completely dry balance, or it's an artful balance.
I think that balance is what makes the proposition believable, or what creates the alternative as possibly existing. So you have to have that balance to offer a believable alternative to what we see in everyday life.
So the artist,
if you don't have the balance, then the object falls flat.
Yeah, I mean, at one time artists have been concerned with so many different things, but there have been, in this particular case, of this particular work, there's a long set of stories about verisimilitude. And then it's just funny for us to work on the premise of verisimilitude, but also of abstraction at the same time, or the premise of the virtual, but then the real. So the very painstaking work of mixing paints that are the perfect tonal levels for a visual effect that we want to have occur, which is actually a biological process, or the biological, which is the virtual cactus realized through 3D printing, but then that cactus is stealing the painting. So the painting, the surface of the painting is devalued. So this is like a critique of the high modernist, the sanctity of the artwork, where the cactus takes that surface and puts it on itself. So the two are, it's a harmony of disharmony. So I think we're very interested in reaching a state of unreality or unbelievability through highly orchestrated, believable forms of balance and composition. And that might have been through some exhibitions like Project for a New American Century, or through the collaborationists, which I think are amongst the finer examples of a full presentation of our work that worked out well. It was properly balanced. Because other times it's just been like a giant mess of all of these balances and counterbalances, almost like a Rube Goldberg machine or something. So it hasn't succeeded.
Well, in other instances, I think we started, when we were first looking at producing an exhibition, we thought of it as curating a number of different artists. But it was, our work. It was a solo exhibition, but we wanted to make it look like it was perhaps work produced for a group show. And then I think as we sort of moved on in our practice, our idea of what kind of exhibition we wanted to do sort of evolved, and it became a more totalizing project for us.
I think it takes a lot of experience to know how to do that well. So, we're still working on that. I think some of those earlier exhibitions, they could have been more explicit in terms of, but we didn't think about that. We were like, I don't know, we weren't thinking about our audience necessarily understanding the work. So, anyhow, enough of that.
Well, okay, not understanding how an audience would come to the work. How do you see an audience coming to the work?
Well, I think Jen was mentioning, you've got to engage. Hopefully show something interesting. I think the art should be interesting, no?
Yeah. Quite often we think of the viewer as a participant with the work as well, so the viewer completing the piece.
I think that was definitely...
And that, if the viewer chooses to participate, they're automatically engaging. And we've also always thought of different levels of viewing. Not all people want to participate or take an active role, and in that case, they're watching someone else and imagining themselves in that situation. So that's one strategy we've had in terms of creating engagement with the work.
Yeah, there was definitely an earlier obsession with that because there was too much of we must have felt that art is not engaging, or that audiences were becoming too dismissive. So the artwork wasn't believable anymore. It could be easily dismissed, and that was a problem. So we saw interactivity as an important concept to investigate. Now I would just say that definitely I want to make somebody's nickel worth it, so they're going to get something visually impressive. They're going to get something that will maybe hold them for a while, and then they're going to get something that is both appears to be very superficial and easy to get, and then there's going to be an underbelly that's really quite open to questioning. And how do we see audiences? Well, we see them as essential for the production and dissemination of art, and part of what it's for. But sometimes, a show looks best with nobody in it, so it looks best just with the artist looking at it when it's just installed. But definitely, it's an important thing. It's not being thought about enough. Beyond just what we're doing as a practice, audiences are really important. They need to be engaged more. I think there's a problem with audience growth.
Audiences react, of course, to a great extent from within the context that they sense exists around them. And I guess in that respect, there's, I know in the art world, there are terms like zeitgeist and dominant discourse and such. Most people don't talk in those terms. But nonetheless, they feel, and I think you feel, and I feel, that there is somehow something that links people together at a particular historical point. And I'm kind of curious, and this is the question. Is there something in the current context that we work within, that you work within, that you think that the work, or you feel that the work is responding to, or is taking perhaps even a position against? Great answer. We talked about modernism and modernity, and you've obviously had a fascination with that particular historical period for some time. What kind of period do you think we're in?
I don't know. We've been in a period of amnesia for, let me see, 37 years. We've been in a post-truth period. People say it's only 1 or 2 years. It's actually 45 years. And I'm being half serious about these things. And we're in the most democratized era, except the least, what would you say? The least likely to do anything about that. And then I think we're entering into a virtual era. We don't realize it. So there's a lot of artists who are, like, in my opinion, wrongly getting into things like disenchantment and talismans and so on as a response to the virtual era. But I think that, I think we want to become cyborgs. So the era, politically, is could be compared to some previous things, but it's beyond the people's wildest imagination of even 2 years ago. I think they don't even know. They don't even know what they're in. People, they compare it to like fascism. And the protest people, the people who are protesting are bigger fascists than the fascists, and the fascists are bigger communists than the fascist ones were. Like, it's all of the definitions are blending into each other. It's really a mess.
Reading theory can, in a sense, articulate what you're talking about. I'm kind of curious whether you're interested in theory on this level.
I read a lot of theory. I think it's good to read and then to forget about it. And then I think that people should watch YouTube, and I'm actually pretty serious about that, because anything you want to watch is instantaneously you can get on YouTube, and you can hear those people. No, it's not just cat videos. You can get like the whole collection of anytime a certain philosopher has been interviewed. Of course you should read things and so on, but the problem is going back to the trope discussion. I'm seeing things in museums that I thought, I'm like, oh, well, this is a concern of the 1990s or something, but it's become core curriculum. So it's being taught over and over again, and it's 4th or 5th generation now. It's really boring, and it's being repeated, and generations who are just picking up on it think that they're the first to know. And then if you look at some of these listicle type things that come in into your inbox from art publications, like, this is so funny. This young person, or this person who's written this, probably thinks they're the first to write on the subject, but I've had enough of it already. So
I think also when we look at things that are being discussed and what you see in institutions or museum shows, as Daniel says, some of it does seem to be concentrating on either issues that have been discussed and are just coming back again and again, and maybe safer issues, or smaller issues. So there's so many things happening in the world, it's easier to look at issues of identity, etc., instead of looking at the larger power structures and the larger global situation. And I think that's problematic, and I think as an artist, if you step outside of that, you're either not given the authority or it's not actually what's contemporary or in style right now as well. So I think some of these issues are just almost a trend.
yeah, it's like what makes people feel a little bit guilty and then a little bit good about themselves. I don't know, I visit to the new museum on a Saturday afternoon, and it's just, I think what Jen is trying to hint at is that there's a bit of misery porn in the art world being presented as art exhibition, and thinking that, pretending that it's dealing with a situation, but the people who give money to that museum or perpetuate a certain lifestyle are the ones who are causing that misery to happen in different parts of the world. And then some of the artists who are working in those other parts of the world are also somehow complicit with the colonizers that they're critiquing and so on. So it's interesting for us to look at the larger power structures and find critiques. So I don't want to be involved in some theory or interfacing with some theory because it's probably by some academic that I can't stand for some reason or another, and some university that's full of snots and so on that shouldn't be given the time of day. So I don't know how to explain it, but definitely it would be, let's go to some of the top of these problems and find ways to play around. Not that we've necessarily succeeded with it, but the art making is getting a little prescriptive when it's coming down to, so when you say theory, you're talking about, Frankfurt School and sort of now getting to be it's going to be 100 years of, smaller and smaller sub-interests and theories and so on. Has it produced anything exciting that, I don't know, rarely. So
Something this reminds me of Marx's famous remark that history is constituted by first tragedy and then farce. And I had this odd sense that as I hear you speak, that again there seems to be almost a fusion between tragedy and farce.
yeah, it's like a sugar tax. And let's say there's a group of people in a town that are obese and they're not in your class, and you're the kind of person who doesn't want to pay taxes. So you say, well, how do I feel good about myself and screw the poor at the same time as to have a sugar tax? And then how do I present to people that aren't in favor of the sugar tax as pro-Trump, and how do I portray myself as somehow caring? So yeah, we would definitely want to find those people and smoke them out, right? And that would be something to make art about. So I like the old kind of like Hans Hacke projects more than the current stuff, which is about something that seems much smaller. So does it fit a model of history and farce? I mean, Jen, you would just say like, let's just not do that, right? Like, let's not engage in that subject. Or I don't know how to like the day to day around here would just be like that's.
Dan, a little bit ago, you were making some interesting remarks about curators.
Our two largest exhibitions are both highly curated and written about. Project from the American Century and Collaborationists. They're both curated, the former by Philip Monk and Emily Changer, a bit, yeah.
A bit, yeah.
And then
Melissa Bennett and Linda Jansma.
Linda Jansma. So in both cases, I think the curator recognized something about the work and said, I wanted to offer to that artist the opportunity to use our space, provide resources, and provide dialogue. I think that's the way we've worked best. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about curators. Do you have anything more to say?
Yeah, I think from early on, I mean, Daniel used to curate shows as well. So, and there's an aspect to our practice that is self-curation, I think. So when we work with curators, we tend to bring a show to the curator. And there is discussion and input. But it might also be that we're used to working in a collaboration, so things are always discussed and we have to agree with each other moving a project forward. So that could be part of it as well.
Also, I don't know, like, in what case we would have work available for a curator. Like we would have to be making that work first, and it takes so long to realize one of our projects. I think we have 3 or 4 different solo show ideas worked out at any one time.
What's interesting is I think there are different curators who we've connected with. And even if we're not working with at the moment, there are ongoing discussions. There are some curators we've worked with in the past that we think we'll work with again. So I think really it's a relationship that builds over time.
I think we would probably have closer relationships with the smaller pool of curators and want to work with them several times. It would be a more meaningful thing for us.
That makes sense. The critic is a different kettle of fish. You can't work with a critic in the same way that you can work with a curator. And yet the work has received critical response. How do you feel about those responses?
I mean, I don't know. It's like when you read about this stuff, it's as if you were being spoken of, and people didn't realize you were in the same room as them or something. That's what it feels like. It feels distant and also
immediate.
Sort of like, well, why didn't you ask us about this? Like, what you just thought of this stuff and you didn't. Oh, you missed this point. You could have called us or something. So it's a very inexact field. I can't. I guess I eat at a restaurant. I guess I rate it. Watch a movie and decide whether or not I like it. It's just it's a very strange process. Glad that some of them exist. Usually, if the review is bad, it seems like the person has misunderstood something, or they just like wish us ill will. It feels like I don't know. It hasn't really mattered. It doesn't matter either way. Like extraordinarily amazing reviews don't seem to do anything,
Yeah.
and horribly bad ones don't seem to do anything. We've had it both.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, Jen has been she's completely detached about it. So
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to have reviews. So as long as you have reviews, I'm not sure it's as important what the review says.
Just get the name and stuff.
But
or I think we've been reviewed for work that wasn't that important, and then like what I think is really our most important work has been ignored. So
That's- yeah.
How do you account for that? And then there's people who like go out and get reviews from I don't know their friends or beg for a review.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to explain that. I mean, definitely like
that's why I say I think the most important thing is to get the review, not necessarily whether you're happy with what the review says, because I think that's been the greatest disappointment, when there's something you think should have a review and it's ignored.
And then they might even, like, I think we're old-fashioned, like, we think it's important that something gets published in a magazine that's gone through an editing process where the pictures are correct, where the fact-checking has been done and so on. So I think we're old-fashioned. Now it's like, is your work Instagrammable? Has it received tons of likes? Is it being circulated in a viral way? And is it legible just through your JPEG on a phone screen? You know, so.
But that means the work is successful in the digital realm, but I'm not sure it means anything further than that, or is more significant than that.
And then what was the question? Do we like critics, or are critics important? What do we think of critics? There's not enough of them. There's too many of them. Like who's reading what they're writing?
I think we've had the most feedback from other people when we've had maybe more negative reviews, and then we've had the strongest feedback in supporting the project or supporting the show. So.
Yeah, I don't understand it. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know what it does. Artists should probably do more outreach in general. And there's so many codified rules in the art world. And so if a critic has misunderstood something, like, call them up and explain it to them. If you're unhappy about something, write a response. If you get a really good review, don't maybe share with everybody on Facebook. Like, they'll probably see it. Like, there's a lot of codified things, and I think it's good to work in a partnership because feels less personal. I think artists should break some of the barriers of the hidden codifications that exist in the art world. So,
All of that being said, I think we have had in our career some reviews that have been important to us.
yeah,
And,
that's
it's true.
It's true. I'm jaded. It is. I think a long time ago we were really excited to get something about our work into the papers. We get asked to, I don't know, comment on something or be part of some panel with some frequency. So we're not feeling that we're lacking attention. So. But yes, thank you to critics who early on in our career wrote something. Please don't cut that out of this video.
And critics who we respect, and we have certain critics that we do have a relationship with.
Hi Murray, if you're watching this.
Well, there are others. There's Ben.
Ben, yes, thank you Ben.
There's Brian.
Brian, yes, he's good.
Well, this brings us to the art world, isn't it? And I'm hesitant now to ask you what you think of the art world, but I'm going to anyway.
The world we work in doesn't always make sense.
It's called a system, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a
called a
system.
system,
I mean,
yeah.
I don't know, what are you talking about, Canada, world, Europe, South Pole?
The one you, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I hadn't realized that you'd shown in the so specific, but what,
What's seen, because I mean, like, Canada is like totally, it's almost a separate, self-sustaining thing. And I think there's an international art world. There's also there's an art world of just purely commercial, which is somehow has become more and more influential in the museum world. I don't know, what do we think about it? It's huge, it's a huge system. I think we just think about our gigs and tune out some of the nonsense and then try to go a little bit against the grain. There's just so many things that people think is like the right way to do things, or the right art to make, or fitting in a certain way. There's a raining sound. That's fine.
The rain would be worse than the background.
Like our art world it's both huge and small, because our art world is our studio and the projects we're trying to do, and then the kind of like advancements in our career, which are like the kind of milestones for sustaining a practice. So.
well, I guess it's that sustaining a practice that is of great interest to others, because as we all know, it can be very difficult to sustain a practice. I'm hearing you say that the best way of sustaining a practice is to concentrate on the here and now and work in the studio and see what happens. Would that be the case?
No, it's concentrate on the future. So to sustain a practice,
You don't wait and see what happens. You always have to be planning on what's going to happen next.
and planning like far, far ahead, like 2, 3, 4 years ahead. And then you have to have done everything perfectly in the past too. So that's a weird thing about, it's like being a ranked tennis player or something like that. It's terrible. So there is some past groundwork that is part of the whole process as well. I think we're thinking about about commissions and production, and about studio practice, and then the here and now. So we're thinking about, we have a logic in our practice, but then in order to make an uncertain present, it's weird. It's almost like you have certainty in order to create some conditions for making art.
But I'm going to go back to the question of modernity, which is still with us, and I think one of the reasons why your work has such cogency, despite the varying trends and whatnot that come and go in the art world. But I'm going to go back to the modernist paradigm, if I can call it that: originality, authenticity, and a question that I think lurks behind everyone's curiosity is the question, what is real here? What can I hold on to? What seems substantial enough to be able to take away? I'm kind of curious what you yourselves understand about what is real in the relationship that your practice has to an audience.
Oh my god. There are a lot of people who are looking for indexical marking by an artist that is peculiar only to that artist's practice, that is recognizable as that artist's signature style. And that might be more important than whether they think it's a good painting. It just has to be an example of it. And hence the perpetuation of that myth in the American market. And then imagine you're a person who could have like a personal interaction with one of the originators from that time. And then, and you know what, it wouldn't even be, it's...
I think we've always tried to look at authenticity by undermining or questioning authenticity. And then seeing what happens, seeing if something remains, or I think especially when we first started working, we wanted to take away the individual author from the artwork and go against that idea of authenticity. With these paintings, they were sort of thought of as, you know, how do we see digitally? And if we're looking at things digitally, doesn't that undermine the idea of authenticity? Yet we produce the paintings and you stand in front of the painting, and is the authenticity really undermined, or does it exist?
So, Jen, you're suggesting that what is at stake here is the necessity of a kind of undecidability.
It's taking emphasis away from the artist, the individuality of the artist, and it's seeing if that authenticity can still exist. I think when we're talking about history and authenticity, so much of it is linked to an artist's name. And then it's really about how history's told and which artists have been remembered or which artists have become part of that history. And so I think we were trying to sever the idea of authenticity from the idea of the individual artist to a degree.
Yeah, like one artist friend was mad, he's like, oh, you had to do the cactus, like, which is just like, you're so doubting, you know, like you have to do the cactus beside the painting. I'm like, well, no, it's part of a bigger, it's like a bigger narrative. And it's not just, but hopefully it does look like just a really quick juxtaposition. But it's actually, it's part of a bigger narrative, it's not flippant.
It's not just a gimmick.